Matthew 18, starting at verse 21, and it reads, "Then Peter came to him and asked, 'Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times?' 'No, not 7 times,' Jesus replied, 'but 70 times 7. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decides to bring his accounts up to date with his servants who have borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. He couldn't pay, so his master ordered that he be sold, along with his wife, his children, and everything he owned, to pay the debt. But the man fell down before his master and begged him, 'Please, be patient with me, and I will pay it all.' Then his master was filled with pity for him, and he released him and forgave his debt. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged for a little more time. 'Be patient with me, and I will pay,' he pleaded. But the creditor would not wait. He had the man arrested and put into prison until the debt could be paid in full. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. They went to the king and told him everything that had happened. Then the king called in the man he had forgiven and said, 'You evil servant, I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant, just as I have had mercy on you?' Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he paid his entire debt. That's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart." As you're preparing to take your seats, everyone help me introduce the title. Everyone say, "Forgive more." You may take your seats. Forgive more. I opened today with the story of a little girl. She had just come home from church, and she mentioned to her mother that her stomach was hurting. Her mother, in always great parental fashion, recognized that the young lady hadn't eaten and told her 6-year-old daughter, "Well, that's because your stomach is empty. Go eat you a little something. I have a snack. I guarantee you'll feel better." The little girl ate the food, felt much better, and went on about her day. Later on that afternoon, the pastor of the church came over to the house. They were eating, and the pastor mentioned that his head hurt. The little girl came up to him and said, "That's because nothing is in it. You need to fill it up." Anybody? Something a little bit? I imagine that pastor in the moment, responding to a little girl that just told him he had an empty head, might have needed to pose some restraint, maybe think that he might have needed to provide some forgiveness to the family, because surely this little girl didn't come up with this by herself. But I'm amazed at what we all may be called upon to do when somebody comes and offends us. Now, as we enter into this parable really grabs me because it leads in with Jesus having a conversation with Peter. And I love, Matthew constantly puts Peter up. Peter oftentimes represents all of the disciples, but Peter now jumps up and he's communicating and he wants to get a bit of clarity. "Hey, Jesus, I want to make sure that I'm in line with what I should be doing. If somebody has offended, has sinned against me multiple times, Where should I draw the line? Where's our limit? At what point does this not become savory? It's not good, it's unhealthy. How many times should I forgive them? And Peter doesn't start with like 1 or 2, like many of us, maybe even 3. He kind of goes to a number that we would even say is spiritual, 7. Surely this is the completion of my forgiveness. And on number 8, something else would need to happen. And Jesus responds in a way that I think would cause all of us to say, did he say that? Now, depending on which text you develop, we recognize that the scriptures have come to us over time. So in some texts, it says 77, meaning that Jesus added even an order of magnitude to what Peter comes in. It's not just 7 times, but 77 times. Again, something that you probably are not going to keep accounting of. Who walks around with your friends, like, all right, this is number 39, all right, 39. You better watch yourself, right? Or 70 times 7. There are some older translations that actually say that it was meant to be multiplied. So now we're talking about 490 times. The idea of the matter, what Jesus is lifting up, is that you should forgive them so much, it should be too much for you to count. That you should continually forgive. And I want to lift that up because I think, myself included, needs to be reminded of how our Savior thinks about forgiveness. Now, I want you to know that forgiveness is not like a Christian concept. Christians aren't the only ones that talk about forgiveness. In fact, in most major religions, there's an idea or a notion of some level of forgiveness. It is baked in. It is part of the human experience. In fact, it is so palpable. If you go through many psychological or even medical institutions, they will lift up that there are even health benefits for forgiveness. Mayo Clinic lists up a list of things that benefit a person individually from practicing forgiveness. That you have healthier relationships, improved mental health, less anxiety and stress and hostility, lower blood pressure, fewer symptoms of depression, stronger immune system, improved heart health, and improved self-esteem. Johns Hopkins, one of the top institutions as it relates to medical, says that forgiveness helps to reduce and lower your risk of heart attack. That it actually improves cholesterol levels and enhances sleep. That it actually reduces pain, blood pressure, and lowers levels of anxiety, depression, and stress. It says that research points to an increased connection between forgiveness and health as one ages. Meaning that the older that one gets, the more beneficial forgiveness can be. And conversely, the older we get, a lack of forgiveness becomes even more detrimental. These are sobering, but also encouraging. That we ought to forgive. And one might even ask the question, what is meant by forgiveness? When you say, when Jesus is talking to Peter, what is he saying? Is he saying forget? And we've talked about this before. I don't believe that forgiving is forgetting, but it does mean not counting the offense against the offender. In practical terms, it means one can recall the wrongdoing and not have the negative emotional attachment to it. That a key signal of forgiveness is not that I forget the problem, but I can remember the problem and it no longer has a hold on me. Because the truth about forgiveness is it actually benefits the individual and not the offender. Terry, can you bring me my bag? See, I think many of us, we treat forgiveness like it is a bag. And we really think that the bag then is given to somebody else. But the truth of the matter is we walk around and we carry the bag. And when we choose not to forgive, it is like us walking around with a weight on our shoulders. And some of you, we're like those people that like, it's not just like a little weight, right? Because like, it's one thing when somebody has done something, but then when you run into them again, it's almost like adding insult to injury. Oh, come on. I know y'all know what I'm talking about. Like, then you'll see them and you mad at them, right? Because they done did you wrong and they out having a good time. And you like, I can't believe they out there having a good old time. Going through life like they ain't offended nobody. And here it is. That person's still fine. But now it's like we added a little bit more onto our bag. And it don't just stop there, right? Like, not only are they going and they doing, don't let this person be somebody at your job, right? Then they get a promotion. And you like, ain't no way in the world. You sit there. Water cooler, when we used to have water coolers, right? Now it's just like we on Twitch or we up there messaging other folks. Can you believe this? They don't tell the truth ever, right? And those are low offenses. What happens when the offense is bigger? This person lied to a spouse about seeing you out with somebody. And now your relationship is messed up. And then you see them in a healthy relationship. Now the bag gets a little heavier. Because now not only do you have to deal with the fact that your relationship is messed up, but you see them living a life that you should be. It's even more offensive to you. Hurts you even more. Or this person, whatever they did to you, has stripped a piece of your life out. And we talk about offense, right? Like sometimes at church, we try to keep it so clean, but life isn't always clean. Sometimes people have done very terrible things to us. They stripped us of our innocence. We can never get it back. They've taken away the things that we used to define ourselves as. And we can never find those again. And now, we walk around carrying all the weight, not just now of what they did to us, but the fact that they aren't feeling any of the weight that we are. And this is how we show up every day. Weighted and burdened. We wonder why life feels so heavy. Wonder why it feels like it's so much more work for us to do the same things as everybody else. Because we're burdening it. You're right. They did it to you. You're right. You didn't deserve it. You are absolutely right. It is not fair. But you carrying it, that ain't fair either. It's no benefit to you. All it does is weigh you down. Jesus comes up to Peter, and his response to Peter is forgive more. If you think that you've forgiven them enough, forgive more. If you think that you've done enough, forgive more. Because there's actually a benefit that comes to you. Now, there's another layer to kind of get down deeper into this, right? So not only should we forgive more, but now Peter kind of lifts up a real issue. He says, now wait a minute. I'm not talking about somebody who has offended me once. I'm now dealing with a repeat offender. I'm dealing with somebody who may be showing me that this action is not just an action, but it may be part of character. Should I keep putting myself in the position for them to hurt me? How do I now better take care of myself? And this is where Matthew is really instrumental. Because if you look a few verses above this, starting at verse 15 in the very same chapter, Matthew is dealing with how to deal with a person who offends you within the community. So that the community can go well, it is like it says, literally, if somebody offends you, go to them. I just want to say that out loud again because I'm always amazed at how foreign of a concept that is to people. Somebody offends you, you go to them. We don't go to our friend first to rally up and then go to them. We don't just sit on it trying to act like we're being spiritual and then really just holding it in and becoming more and more angry and bitter. We actually are told to go to them. Spiritual maturity will show you when you are able to communicate with somebody who has offended you, and not that you go to them ready to fight, not that you go to them ready to throw down. You go to them to communicate the offense. You go with a level of humility because maybe they didn't know it. And I know this is hard. This is really hard because life for us has become so busy. It moves so fast. It is so much stuff happening that all we have is our own perspective. And sometimes we walk through life like everybody sees the world the way we do. But what happens if this person didn't even know they offended you? How many times have you walked in someplace and somebody saw you, they thought you saw them, and then you didn't say nothing? Now they walking around like, oh, she think or he think they somebody, and you never even saw them. You weren't trying not to communicate. You didn't know they were there to communicate in the first place. Go to them. You might need to figure this out. And once you get there, you might find out that there was just miscommunication. And all of a sudden now that you know this new information, it changes the way that you understand what happened. And now reconciliation can happen. There's a beautiful possibility. But you also may get there and find out they did something on purpose. Or they don't want to own up to it. Man, that ain't hurt you. It wasn't that bad. Just get over it. What you gonna do about it? So that's the one I don't like to hear, right? Because then that's when I have to control the non-saved part of Jason that still wants to rise up. Because I know I act really spiritual, and typically I'm pretty good, but I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago, okay? I just always want to put that back out there because I don't ever want you to think that I'm perfect. I'm far from. I got a lot of issues on the inside, and there are certain things that they can rise up. What you gonna do is one of those things that like to rise it up. Because that's like you saying, I'm short, I'm small. You know, I just made a whole story up in my head. You saying, I'm short, I'm small, and you're gonna do something to me. Let me let you know something, brother. I figured a lot of things out. I know. I'm sorry, my bad. You may go to them, and they may not respond in kind. You may figure out that the offense was intentional. Now, what do? Scripture doesn't say now you talk about them and go online. Now it says go and get a confidant, somebody you can trust to go back to them still with the goal of reconciliation. Hey, we missing some stuff. This ain't right. Let us talk together. Then it says if that don't work, you actually bring it to church leadership. Now, this is funny to me, right? Because, number one, we rarely ever do this, right? Because that's just weird. And I'm not saying I want y'all to start bringing me all y'all problems. Pastor, you know what? That singer over there, they snap. You need to, no, because that's how it comes. It's never like, hey, we need some reconciliation. It's you need to deal with them. That's how it always comes. But it's saying now within community, when we're connected to one another, we use the pressure of being social to help mend bridges. Not that the pastor comes down or the deacon comes down to lay down the verdict, but it helps to mitigate, to help individuals hear maybe what they're missing to move forward. And if you find out that somebody really is recalcitrant, they are completely away from the fellowship, then you presume that they no longer want to be a part. And the scripture says you treat them like a tax collector. You treat them as if they are not part of the fellowship. It is after Jesus has said this that Matthew nestles, but we ought to be forgiven. And why do you think he puts it there? Because he knows people. And he knows church people. And we'll be real legalistic when it's about somebody offending us. And we'll run through the process real quick, ready to excommunicate folks, ready to kick them out of the fellowship, ready to really exact vengeance on them. Because sometimes what we do is we expose people by trying to say we're going to them, so we need to bring somebody else. But the truth is, what you're trying to do is air somebody's dirty laundry, so now their dirt is in the street, so you can make them feel bad, look bad, instead of rightly working through reconciliation. He says, so, hear me. The goal is reconciliation. The goal is never vengeance. The goal is reconciliation. It's never vengeance. And although there may be spaces where reconciliation does not happen, that has to be the way we go. Therefore, forgive more. I know that they have offended you multiple times. That doesn't free you from the responsibility of forgiveness. Now, I want to hold this just for a moment, right? Put that there. So, here's the space in Christian theology where we have to work through nuance. Because I've often heard this with zero nuance, and it seems completely disconnected. So, somebody will take this and they'll overly apply it to a person in a domestic violence situation. No, girl, just stay there and, just forgive. Whoa. That's not how this is meant to be used, right? This is one of the critiques of the church. I remember I told you all earlier this year, I was in South Carolina. I got a chance to visit Mother Emmanuel, and there's the space where now we recognize somebody of white supremacy enters in to do harm to black community, to take black lives. And one of the critiques is that since these are church people, one of their first things that they did was they forgave. And all of a sudden now, to the black community, the church seems weak. As if our forgiveness is some platitude, some easy thing to be gained, and all of a sudden now it makes us consistent victims. That is not what Jesus is talking about. The forgiveness they gave was right because it was for them. The work towards making sure they're held accountable still can happen even with forgiveness coming. We make sure we forgive so we don't become the very same thing that we're angry at, that we don't become offenders just like we have been offended. Therefore, we don't hold on to the bitterness. We don't sit in that anger. We try our best to release it. And sometimes it takes a lot longer to release than others. Sometimes there's a process to forgiveness that we have to go through over and over again, to constantly wash ourselves out of all of the heavy weight that forgiveness requires. But forgiveness is still needed in nuance. If you are in a bad situation where your life is in peril, get out. Work through forgiveness in safety, not in proximity. You're right. If there's a consistent offense, work for justice, while still holding your heart that we don't become bitter. And this is and one of my critiques to a civil rights activist and activists altogether is that we have to become so hateful of the other that once we get past the issue, we've learned how to hate them. And so all of a sudden, hate don't just go away. And that's what happens when we have to live together. Because I've been trained and thought and paid attention to and developed how to hate. And it's the same thing that happens on the other side. What sense would it make? Black community, hear me as best as you can. What sense would it make for us to replicate the very actions of white supremacy in trying to get over white supremacy? Do you think black supremacy is the thing that's going to happen in America? America will never be a black supremacist country. Ever. So, what does that do? Now, empowerment Wonderful. Lifting up community? Wonderful. We cannot take the actions and the language of the oppressor and try to fuse it onto the oppressed. Because what that does is that it causes us to have in idolatry the very system that is killing us. And we try to mimic what we say is bad. And the only thing we're saying is bad because it hurts us. He says, forgive more. But not only this, then he gives a story. He gives a parable. Now, I'm going to do a bit of theological working. And there'll be levels to this by which may be confusing. And if they are, I'm going to say this almost like we're in school. If I say something that's really confusing, I just want you to lift your hand. If you're online, I'm sorry, I can't see you. But lift your hand anyway, just out of good practice. But if you're in the building and I say something that's confusing, lift your hand because I want to make sure you get this because this is hard. So then Jesus drops into a parable to help describe what he's trying to communicate. While talking to Peter, he says, now, listen, there was a king, a despot, an individual of high power that ruled in the area. And after he was going through his accounts, he recognized that there were some underservants of his that have not fully paid in full. Right? So we're thinking potentially this is kind of like Gentile idea. So Jesus is using a Gentile story, which is almost amazing in and of itself. But he's telling this story and he says, so they come into him. He looks at the account and the amount that this man owes him is so much, it is implausible that he will be able to repay it in his lifetime. The number that they give is 10,000 talents. Now, 10,000 talents is thought to be the amount that 6,000 day laborers would make over 15 years. This is a lot of money. A day laborer makes this amount over 15 years. I'm sorry, not 15, but a day laborer makes this amount over 15 years, and there are 10,000 of them. So think about 15 years of wages multiplied by 10,000. Now, in this time, $1 million probably was somewhere close. I just did the numbers. If you use, like, let's say $20 an hour, you could easily be in the billions. Like $1.2 billion that this man would owe. The creditor now, the king, knows there's no way he will ever repay this. And so, at best, what he can do is torture him, try to get some semblance out of selling them, but he's never going to recoup his money. The man, recognizing the huge amount of offense, drops to his knees and begs, please, please, just give me a chance. I promise to repay you. You know he lying. Like, right? Like, he just like us. Like, have you ever dropped? Sometimes I've done this to God, right? Like, God, I promise I'm never going to do this again. Please, right? He drops down. Please, I'm going to pay you back. It is implausible that you're ever going to pay me back. But the king has compassion. He says, okay. Now watch this. He doesn't say, just give me some of it. He wipes the debt clean. He treats the individual as if he owes him nothing, as if all accounts are now up to date. $1 billion written off. Mind blowing. The same man walks out, the one who had owed money, and now he was a person of great stature, and they believed that the reason why he owed the king so much because he probably was collecting taxes and he was doing some either fraudulent or just some really terrible accounting. Now he goes to somebody under him, and this person owes him money. Now, using the same slide of rule, the same calculation, when I calculated how much this man would owe to the person who had owed the king so much, it came out to $16,000. $1,016,000. And he grabs the man by the neck and says, no, I want my money now. and you will be jailed until you can fully repay. Now, of course, the king got a whole bunch of other servants walking around. They see the man now with this guy in his hand, putting him in jail, and they're like, wait a minute. Ain't that brother so-and-so that just got forget? They run back and tell the king, King, you can't believe this, man. As soon as he walk out of here, you done gave him all this lenience. He go grab somebody, and they in jail for a debt that they owe him. And the king's like, no, not the guy I just forgave $1 billion to, not that guy. I'm telling you, it was the same guy. Man, I'm telling you, king, it was that same dude. He walked out your building like, forget the king, I'm about to go grab me some more money. The king is like, bring him to me. Right? He comes back in, he's like, now, the story is that you went out there and you did this. For that reason now, you will be put in jail and tortured until you can repay me, which we already know you can't. So for the rest of your life, you will be tortured for not paying me back. Now, story makes sense, right? Here's the challenge. I want to offer this because I want to grow a congregation that is spiritually healthy. The way that Matthew writes this, because it's written slightly different in Luke, is Matthew changes the parable, not like words and meaning, but he turns the parable into what they call an allegory. Follow with me. Allegory then now uses individuals to symbolize other individuals. When Jesus initially tells the story, the point is how great the debt is versus how small the debt is. When Matthew retells the story, now he says the king is like God. Well, this creates challenge for any reader of the Bible because the king does some stuff that at best would be questionable. You mean the king, God, was going to put family as slaves? Question mark. You mean God is going to renege on a promise of forgiveness? That God is going to turn it around? So I say this to say, I'm lifting this up. I don't want you to hear this, right? That these are pieces that are written as we try to tell and retell the gospel story. That does not mean that the Bible is not meant to be trusted, but we have to do the serious work of understanding the heart of the message. If not, what we'll do is we'll incorrectly apply things to places they don't need to be applied, and we might start communicating things about God that now don't make sense. Matthew is writing, and it's not that he has this idea of God wrong, but in trying to make the point, makes a connection, and now folks think that God is like an evil king, that God gonna go back and forth. When the truth is, the point he's trying to make is that we forgive more because we've been forgiven. He says, this man was forgiven. And since he had been forgiven, then the expectation is he would be forgiving. It is implausible that we will receive any type of forgiveness and not in turn dish it back out. It's even more implausible for us to receive great amounts of forgiveness and now be able to give forgiveness for something on a smaller account. So what Matthew is writing, he says, now that we understand the full story of Jesus, now that we are at the end of this story and I'm retelling it, what we do know is that God forgave a great debt. I think this is where the modern day church and the modern believer misses it, and we forget it. We walk around like God only kind of forgave us. We walk around like we really haven't offended God. We walk around like we deserve to be in the God's good graces. We walk around like God owes us something. We walk around like God just gave us something little. But if I could just help you to understand how great the cost was of the sin that you live in and the offense that it brings to God, it is like the same as that $1 billion. Do you know how big of a cost sin is? And this is how the enemy lies to us. Because he constantly sells us on, this is a little sin. This ain't that bad. You ain't killing nobody. When the truth is, in comparison to the holiness of God, that even the thing that you think is small and insignificant is huge and abhorrent. And it creates an impossible chasm that can no longer be crossed. Sin means God can no longer touch and commune with us because of God's sheer holiness. Not because God is being mean, but God is so holy that his presence automatically takes away sin. It would immediately happen. Therefore, if God comes without restraint, all those with sin would be completely wiped away. God cannot be in the presence of it. It cannot stand up to God. Therefore, if God gets close to anything with it, it is completely wiped out. This is why Jesus' coming is so big, and it now doesn't make any sense to us because God does something that we didn't think was possible. He wraps himself fully, perfectly, wonderfully into skin and flesh so that he can come and be around that which God could never be around before, therefore giving us a chance at being able to connect back with God again when God does this impossibility, sending his son to earth, and then he dies. What he does is now he wipes away the $1 billion debt. He says now it has been paid in full. He says now you can walk away with your life. He says now you have opportunity and occasion because I paid it all. And if you knew how big this was, it would change how you approached life. Because this isn't something small. All of the cosmos couldn't pay attention to how great this was. In fact, it was so big that when God sent his son, that there was the cosmos wanted to respond, and they birthed a brand new star in the sky so that it can bring light and shed light on what God was trying to do. Do you know how big this is? In fact, it was so big that when the son decided to get up on a cross, that the very sun itself went into protest and says, I refuse to shine my light on this injustice. I will not shine. I'm going to take a day off because he does not deserve to die. But he did it. But he did it. But he did it for me, for you. That's how big it is. It was so big that the earth started to shake. Graves began to open up. The church changed. Everything that we understand was transformed. He paid a cost that we couldn't afford to pay. That the only payment we would have had available would have been to be thrown in prison and tortured forever. But he says, no, I have another way. I'll forgive more. So, this is our call. God desires for you to forgive more. Family, forgive more. Co-workers, forgive more. Neighborhood and communities, forgive more. Country, forgive more. Voters, forgive more. Church folk, forgive more. Church leaders, forgive more. Your spouse, your parents, the person that did that thing that you can't even utter out of your mouth, forgive more. Because what we have been forgiven of is so immensely large that our only response in life is forgiveness. And as we live that out, we become a billboard for what God can do for others. I can't believe he said it, but Jesus said, forgive more. Pray with me.